Hello there, my name's Kevin. I run developer relations at Directus, and I'm in New York City for the first time since the start of the pandemic to meet the team. So that's really exciting. And so I thought I would take this opportunity to meet up with our co-founders, Ben and Rijk, and ask them a bunch of questions that you've posed. That's me making sure I don't get knocked down by a car. Ask a ton of your questions, and this is just the start. We'll be doing this every few months, but I'm gonna go meet with Rijk, and then we are gonna ask him some questions. So one of the first questions we had in is just, what is the value of community to Directus where it's at?
That's a great question. I mean, the value of the community, at the end of the day, it's the foundation where everything is built on at the moment, honestly, where it's like, it starts as an open source project, it still very much is, and it still will remain to be. So it's all, community input and that tight feedback loop is what makes the project what it is, really.
Yeah, because without the feedback, we're just flying blind to a degree. We're building
Absolutely,
stuff for us.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, the goal is to help as many people as we can. So we need that, it's a symbiotic thing, really.
Yeah, absolutely. So I suppose one of the slightly more tricky questions, perhaps, is, you're bracing yourself, is what are some of the, mistakes or missteps that you think we have made as Directus?
Oh boy.
I suppose scope to engineering, but maybe more broadly to date.
That's a great question. I think one of the bigger things that comes to mind is that we've launched a lot of stuff out of sort of enthusiasm, out of proven concepts, right? Where it's just like we were noodling around with a new idea, and it turns out that the proof of concept was already, kind of there. And then you launch the proof of concept to a GitHub branch or something, and then people got excited. And then you end up just pushing it out because it's like, oh, everybody already likes it. Let's just do it, right? But then after the fact, you realize there's
a maintenance burden, or it needs to have been built right.
We hadn't quite figured out the full spec yet, so now it's like, ooh, but it should have done this.
Yeah.
Or it should have worked like that. So taking that slower, has been a big.
I've seen you do that already though in my time here. Internally, as people are excited about proof of concepts, you've been the one to say, right, everyone, we gotta slow down, think about it, think about whether this is something we want to push out, maintain, build properly. So I suppose there's definitely growth out of that.
There's so many fun things that we can do and that we have done and that we're trying out and whatnot. And then it's like, oh, but how would that work for real though?
Yeah. Or at scale.
Or how does that, exactly. So even now with some of the new big features that we're already working on, with WebSockets and stuff, it's like if you really just sit down and just think about what that means, it's like, oh, okay. There's just so much more that shows up, and it's sometimes easy to miss, the bigger picture if you just get excited about a new feature like that. Recently with that ChatGPT stuff as well, right? Where everybody's like, oh, what if we just have AI? And it's like, whoa.
When you build projects for yourself, you really just have to have this implementation that doesn't have to work at scale.
Yeah.
But we're having to think about what it means to build features that not only all of our community can use in open source in their own deployments, but also that we're going to host and have tens of thousands of users have access to right this minute, and the implications of that. Thanks for joining me in my office. Very rude for you to be eating on the job, if I may say so myself, but I've got some questions for you. The first one, which is a little tricky, but I think very fair and very in the forefront of many of our community members' minds, which is there is a risk when building a business that we are then going to struggle to maintain and grow the community that's got us to where we are today. And I'm kind of wondering what you think about that.
Yeah. No, like you said, it is a delicate balancing act, really, where it's like, the community side of things, it grows the project and user base to what it is right now, but at the same time, to make that sustainable over time, we got to make enough revenue and enough profit to really get that, make that work long time. Because the last thing we want to do now is, be sort of flash in the pan and die out immediately.
Yeah. We want people to rely on this project, not just for a year or 2 years, but in 5 and 10 years.
We want to be there, reliable for as long as you need us, right? And in order to do that, we have to make revenue. That's just the way it is. Everybody got to pay their rent. We got to pay. There's loads of costs when it comes to building software at this scale, and yet, if you give everything away in open source, you don't make revenue out of it. So it's a very delicate balancing act. But I'm hopeful that in this dual sort of open source / SaaS model, we can still help out with the parts that are still tricky. Even though the software you already can use, the tricky bit is still hosting and doing it at scale for production use and backups and everything. So I do really believe that sort of that SaaS model next to having the open source code base is a sustainable thing.
Yeah, and we're not turning our back on this community either.
Oh, absolutely not.
We are still there to help people out, right?
For sure.
And that's critical, because without them, we don't have the adoption, we don't have the proof, the social proof that this makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense. Before I got here, the core team was really hot at answering people's questions when they came in on Discord. And, community members have quite rightly noticed that starting to trail off a bit. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts or reasons for this. I know we started to talk about it a bit, but given this context of it sitting here and it being a question that we got from the community, I thought this would be a great arena to talk about it again.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it honestly just boils down to time. It feels like a bit of a cop-out, but it is the simple answer to a very difficult, complicated question, right? Where it's like, early days, smaller open source community, therefore the amount of questions that you get, I could just step into Discord, in the morning and just answer basically all of the open ones and then start moving on with my day. Whereas now we're at a point where it would basically be a 3x full-time job to really, give it the attention and love that it deserves. And then the other thing is we did notice at a certain point, it's like the more duplicated or similar questions you get, it becomes more of a challenge to sort of aggregate the similar ones together first, and then really just focus on explaining it well and sort of permanently when it comes to docs and videos and stuff like that. So I think the focus shifted a little bit from trying to help everybody out individually to trying to help out everyone, the community as a whole at the same time. So that means aggregating all the questions together first and then figuring out the priority of okay, what topics are often asked about. That's also why flows came up just now, because we know we get a lot of questions around how can you debug that better and that sort of thing. So really just taking the time to first aggregating it and then focusing on the more quality content around that rather than trying to do one-off answer.
We're also just, 30-ish people?
Oh, that too.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a huge thing. It's we're 30 people. Yeah. And those 30 people are, engineers who are working on pushing the platform forward and fixing bugs that occur. It includes salespeople who are there to, take on people who want to pay us for the service. And that's great because they make the project sustainable, marketing to gather interest, docs writers. But we are just 30 people and we all have stations that are, pushing the project forward.
Absolutely.
And then answering community questions is something that we absolutely are committed to doing, but within the bounds of the time we have, bearing in mind we also are doing other bits. And that's really tricky because also quite crudely, we have a support offering that, enterprises can pay for, and those contexts enable us to hire people to help with support.
Right. Yeah.
But still, that is just a very small amount of hours that can be spent overall on support. It's appropriate for the people paying, but then when you have the community there as well, the exponential growth of that community and users isn't reflected in the stuff that we have.
For sure.
And that's fine, but then there's this really interesting balance between we're trying to give it the hours, but wow, it's coming in way quicker than we can help with. So, as you quite rightly say, how do we help people without them needing to come to us one-to-one?
Yeah, exactly.
And it's all down in docs and education.
100%.
And then we can help anyone else who asks questions who we have time to.
Yeah,
that's
because there's also a lot of great questions that sort of toy on the difference between how do I do X versus it would be cool if directives could do Y. You know what I mean? But I think right now, just to answer the actual questions that are coming in, we're just focusing on basically tackling it at the source. Just making sure that people don't have to come in to ask the question in the first place, right? Because there's just angles where you said education content,
and then just trying our best for the rest.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. The last question I have for you actually is a little bit more high level, I suppose, which is just how do we decide what to work on in engineering?
Oh, great one.
How do we decide on that?
Yeah. No, that is a great question, which is also one that changed with the growth of the community and the project, obviously. Because when it started out, I mean, especially early days, it was just like whatever the wind blew, and it was just like, oh, it feels like Insights this week, you know what I mean? But nowadays, no, there's way more of a process now. Especially seeing that we have a lot of feature requests coming in as well. It's a pretty big challenge to figure out like which one is the important one to do next, basically. Because like you mentioned, the same goes for engineering. Like there's only so many people and so many hours in a day, so we have to figure out what's important.
What goes into that process?
So it is mostly community interest, honestly, where it's just we have GitHub discussions, which is a great aggregator of new ideas, where somebody comes along and it's like, oh, it would be great if X, right? And then that is the perfect breeding ground to have a discussion back and forth, like how would it work, how could it work, how should it work, and how can we make it work like that, right? And then the other thing is with upvotes, we can basically just have a ranked list of like, here's the top 10 things that we would like to see next from that community angle. And at the same time, there's obviously also parts, it's a big focus is also stability and performance, right? Where it's like, we can't forget that, most of the engineering work is to make sure that what we have remains to work and gets better, rather than, it's not just tacking on more stuff, right? So that's another tricky balance where it's like, we gotta be careful in picking our battles, because every time we push out something new now, we gotta make sure that it's good. It needs to work. And it needs to be reliable, and it's easy to maintain, and it works everywhere.
Another question, I guess, which was explicitly asked, and it's kind of a really nice segue into it. I said it was the last question, I lied. It's ripping off of it, I guess. Is how do we balance kind of feature requests from customers, from people who pay us for Director's Cloud at an enterprise level, or or whatever that might look like, companies who we're wanting to get on board perhaps, and community features. I imagine a lot of the time they converge and they are actually similar, and it just adds like, oh well, we can treat that as like 10 upvotes for the sake of impact. But sometimes I imagine there's feature requests that come in from this more like enterprise land that are just not what the community are interested in, not at odds with it, just not, and we still only have so many hours to spend. So how do you make that decision as to
that's
how
a great
to balance
point.
that?
So we do still look at it with the same sort of 80-20 lens that we do for basically everything, where it's like, if somebody shows up and they want to do a sponsored feature, and they're like, here's what we needed to do, there's still that first layer that we need to look at. It's like, does that make sense for the bigger picture? Right? Where it's like, we want this to go out to as many people as possible, but this feels like something that is so hyper specific to one use case, it might not be as appropriate as a core feature, right? And then it becomes the question of like, okay, are we going to do it as an extension? Are we just going to not do it, right? But luckily so far, what mostly happens is basically what you hinted on earlier, where it's like, the needs of the community are inherently the needs of everybody else, because it's all the same pool, right? So luckily, a lot of the sponsored features and stuff, they come in and they sponsor something that is already on the feature list. So it's basically what you just mentioned, where we treat it as, oh, that just gives it a virtual 10 extra upvotes.
Or however we mentally build that.
See how that bumps it to to-do list, basically. But it is a great way to sort of tie it back into your question around how do you make it revenue work, right? I do think it's a great additional revenue stream, where it's like we get to build the features that we do want to build already, right? But we can offer to sort of prioritize them for a fee, and that helps the revenue side of things. It helps us to be able to fund the building of the feature,
which then everyone can use,
and everybody can use it still.
And I also like because of how extensible Directus is, if it isn't something that's going to be useful to everyone, but for whatever reason, money or whatever, that we deem that no, really we do need to build this to have this company on board or whatever it may be, that there is a way to do it in a way that doesn't push bloat into core as well.
That is
just build extensions.
Exactly.
Really nice. Well, thanks for taking the time to speak to me. This has been really fun. I've enjoyed hanging out in Brooklyn and ending up at Joe's Pizza.
Shout out.
Shout out. It was a good slice of pizza. But thank you very much. I'm going to try and have a chat with Ben over the next few days as we are gathered here in New York City.
Absolutely.
Sick.
Thank you.
Hey Ben, good to see you.
Good to see you, Kevin.
Thanks for making the time.
Yeah.
Even though I totally grabbed you off the side of what we were doing, which is we've been in New York for the last couple of days. How have you found it?
It's amazing. It's always good to get together with the team in person. We've had only 1 or 2 before this, so getting to meet new people on the growing team.
Excellent. So as you know, I got some questions from the community that I've gathered from a few different places. I'm going to start with one from me just to set the scene, which is that we have our first board meeting in a couple of weeks, and I'm kind of curious how you're feeling about it.
Yeah, I mean, there's the normal nerves that come with the first of anything, but really excited. We're hitting our goals and just excited to see what the board thinks and have that communication in both directions.
Nice. Well, the first question from the community, I'm going to start with one of the tricky ones. Sorry, but I've set the scene for it, which is that we have some VCs now, and they want to make their money back, and I'm kind of curious what vision you sold them on, and then kind of how that vision interplays with our community and open source work.
Yeah, I mean, so it's obviously super important for us to make revenue, to have the income that supports our staff, to support our servers and everything that we need to deliver our product and services. And we also have to keep the investors happy. That's just a big part of what we're trying to do, building a sustainable company. My mentality for that has been, we have this enormous breadth of open source users, 21 million Docker downloads right now. You don't need to monetize them all. The goal is a rising tide lifts all ships. If we push the product, if we push the open source offering, and a percentage of those need to host with us, they need our professional services, whatever it might be that we've commercialized, then they can come take that off their plate, and we can drive revenue and continue to keep all those investors happy.
Yeah, that makes sense. I kind of on that same trend, I know something in the forefront of community members' minds, knowing full well that we are marching towards sustainability through making money. At the moment, we have Directors Cloud, where people can pay us to host Directors for them and handle infrastructure, and hosting costs and rolling updates. But I want to know, as do members of the community, what else is in your mind in the kind of short midterm for how we might, make money.
Yeah, so I mean, we have the three-legged stool, as I call it, the milkmaid stool that never wobbles. We've got the core platform, which is that open source cake that we deliver. But it's not just the infrastructure, the table that cake sits on that we're providing. We're also giving those enterprise exclusives. So the cloud comes with exclusive extensions and features and capabilities that are just icing on that cake. They're not a core part of the software, but those, of course, add a value to the cloud service. There's also professional services, support offerings, consulting. There's this whole slew of things that we go beyond the product to deliver to those customers as well. And then, of course, that third leg of the stool is the marketplace. The extensions is essentially a whole app store that can have free extensions from the community, from our authoritative engineers, and some of those can be monetized as well.
So one thing you mentioned was about having extensions that are exclusive to cloud and how they're the icing on the cake. And I'm kind of wondering at what point can we no longer really call ourselves an open source product and instead something more like open core or something like that? How do you grapple with that? How do you grapple with that definition?
So basically you have a number of metaphors. I'm a big fan of metaphors, but the cake one I think works really well. You have this open source core, you have this idea of the cake, and the cake is exactly that, but the scale matters. If you have this ratio of very little cake and a lot of paid icing on top of it, that's not so tasty. You basically have the whole thing is the cake, and then you give it a facade, whatever the important customized bit for you. You can design it, you lay it out, the color, everything. But that ratio is important. You keep a full cake that's exactly what it needs to be. You don't need to maintain it. You just kind of buy it as is, and then you decorate it and you make it yours.
Yes, because you definitely maintain cakes.
Yeah, that's a full-on bakery here.
All right, I'm on to the last couple now, and I think these are possibly the questions you expected, which is, at the time of recording, we are, in the middle of January 2023. What are you excited about in the next year?
I think one of the biggest things from I'm a product person, so on the technical side, I think real-time data, WebSockets is just enormous. The way that we built the platform is this toolkit, and all those tools can be used together. So when you add something like real-time data with WebSockets, you compound things like real-time collaborative editing, real-time dashboards for insights and flows. So I think from a product standpoint, that's certainly the biggest. And then that third leg of the stool, the marketplace, the extensions, having that have the perfect DX, developer experience, having a marketplace in the app where you can very seamlessly pull in that icing, those extensions, that's going to be a huge part of this year.
Nice. And I suppose the inverse of that is, you're the CEO of a company that's employing like 30 people-ish. what are you worried about? What's on your mind?
I think just that. I mean, 18 months ago, it was Rich and I, a two-person open source organization, and now we've grown to 30 folks, and we just hired somebody yesterday. It's very challenging to hold on to your ethos, to your vision, if you scale very quickly. So growing at the right pace, finding the right team members, which we've been very successful at doing, and just making sure that we don't lose track of our vision, the open source nature, the respectful communication, the collaborative nature of growing a distributed team across the globe. Those are challenging things to do, but I think so far we're doing it really well.
Cool, thank you so much. And so that was our first community question time. I'm back in Berlin now editing that video. There's the plant I can't keep alive. But hopefully you found that interesting. It's really important to us to just be as transparent and open as possible with you, the community that has got us to where we are today and will, take us to where we'll be in the future. We'll run this every few months, so keep the questions coming wherever really, we'll see them. And we will bring those into future community question times. I also thought this would be a really good chance to just kind of say that with Rijk at least, we'll do this monthly, and we might dig into some more technical topics around technical decisions that are being made and technical progress and features that are being built. But yeah, hopefully you found this good, and I will see you next time.